Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we descend into the isolated heart of America's last frontier with 7 deeply disturbing true Alaskan small-town horror stories that will make you question what happens when civilization exists only as a fragile outpost against the vast, unforgiving wilderness. These are not works of fiction, but genuine accounts from individuals who lived through experiences that defy rational explanation in communities where help is hours or days away. And the long polar nights reveal things that daylight mercifully conceals. Each story has been meticulously gathered from first-hand testimonies, cross-referenced with local records, and verified through witness accounts that share disturbing consistencies. The remote towns scattered across Alaska harbor secrets buried beneath permafrost and hidden within endless forests. Secrets that outsiders rarely survive long enough to share. From inexplicable disappearances to encounters with forces that predate modern settlement, these accounts expose the terrifying reality of life, where nature still holds absolute dominion. If you crave authentic horror content rooted in real human experience, subscribe to Buried Files and activate the notification bell so you never miss our deep investigations into cases the world has forgotten. After hearing these harrowing testimonies, share your own unexplained encounters in the comments below. Now brace yourself as we venture into Alaska's most disturbing small-town mysteries. In the winter of 2014, when I was 20 and desperate enough to take any job that covered rent, I ended up in a town that barely shows up on most Alaskan maps. The kind of place where the population sign looks optimistic and the road in feels less like a highway and more like a dare. The job description sounded simple on paper: part-time maintenance and overnight security for a church that doubled as the town's community center. I told myself it would just be a few months, a quick way to get ahead. I had no idea I was stepping into a secret the entire town had been keeping buried. Everyone there called the place the Center, even though the building was just an old 2-story church with peeling white paint and a squat annex added onto the back. It sat at the edge of town, where the houses thinned out and the spruce trees pressed closer, their black silhouettes swallowed by long polar nights. The pastor introduced himself on my first day, but it was clear he was more community organizer than religious figure. He shook my hand, handed me a ring of keys that felt too heavy for such a small building, and walked me through my duties. Keep the main doors locked after evening events. Check the furnace, the boiler, the back exits. Make sure nobody is hanging around after hours. You will hear the building creak in the cold. Do not panic. He said that last part with a half-joking smile. But there was something in his eyes that told me he wanted me to take it seriously. The building itself was strange. It was old, but not in a charming way. The walls were too thick, the windows too narrow, and the hallways too long for the size of the structure. Late at night, the radiators hissed like they were whispering to each other, and the floors gave and sighed under every step. The basement was where the food pantry and storage rooms were, plus an old classroom the town used for meetings and AA groups. There was another door down there too. The first time I noticed it was during my orientation walkthrough. The pastor pointed out the pantry, the supply closet, the ancient fuse box. Then, as we turned to go back upstairs, I saw a heavy steel door sunk into the far wall, low to the ground. It did not match anything else in the place. The frame was reinforced, and a thick chain ran through the handle, secured with an industrial padlock that looked new. "What is that?" I asked. "Old sub-basement," he said too quickly. "It floods. It is not safe. You do not go in there. Never. It is sealed, and it stays sealed." He had never looked away from me so intensely as he did in that moment. I laughed nervously and said, "Sure, whatever, not my business." He did not laugh back. My schedule settled into a rhythm fast. The center hosted kids' programs during the day, community meals twice a week, and the occasional late-night gathering when storms cut the power to half the town and people needed a warm place to charge phones and wait it out. My shift started in the afternoon and ran into the night. Most of the time, it was boring. I mopped floors, shoveled snow, checked doors. Isolation wrapped around the building like a second skin. The town itself felt split down the middle. On one side were the younger families and fishermen who treated me like any other outsider. Polite, distant, curious from a safe distance. On the other side were the older folks who had lived there forever, the ones who still called it a village and ran everything from the general store to the volunteer fire station. Those were the ones who really owned the center, even if the pastor's name was technically on the paperwork. They were also the ones who tensed up whenever the conversation drifted anywhere near the basement. It started small. One evening, I was checking the pantry inventory and noticed that some of the donated canned goods did not line up with the log sheets. A few cans gone here, a box of pasta there. At first, I assumed someone had just forgotten to record what they took. People came in and out for food all the time. It was the whole point of the place. Then my own lunch disappeared. I kept my food in the old staff fridge downstairs, separate from the pantry stock. I had written my name on the container with a black marker. One night I went down to grab it, and the fridge door was sitting slightly open. Not enough to trigger the alarm, just enough to bleed out cold air. My food was gone. Nothing else, just mine. It annoyed me more than it scared me, at least at first. I yelled up to the pastor, asked if he had eaten it by mistake. He swore he had not. The volunteers shrugged and joked that someone in town had sticky fingers. I let it go, but it kept happening. Leftover pizza from the youth group, missing the next morning. My marked yogurt, gone. A half-used jar of peanut butter I kept on the door shelf. Lid off, spoon marks inside, sloppily put back. I started locking the staff fridge with a cheap padlock. 2 days later, the lock was still on, but the food was missing again. I told myself that the kids were more clever than they looked, or that another staff member was helping themselves and lying about it. The alternative, that someone else had a key and was coming into the building after hours, was not a thought I wanted to entertain when I was alone in that creaking place at 1 a.m. Then I heard the coughing. It was a Wednesday, the kind of cold that froze your eyelashes together when you stepped outside. A storm had pushed through, leaving the air painfully clear, the stars hard and sharp. The evening program had ended early, and I was the only one left in the building. I was sitting in the small office by the front door, scrolling through my phone, when a faint sound cut through the hum of the furnace. It sounded like a cough, a dry, muffled cough coming from somewhere below my feet. I froze, listening. It came again. Every horror movie I had ever seen flashed through my mind. But I forced myself to stand up, grab my flashlight, and head downstairs. The basement was chilly, the cement floor sweating condensation despite the cold outside. The door to the pantry was closed. The classroom door was open, dark beyond the threshold. I flipped on the lights. "Hello?" I called out, hating how my voice echoed off the low ceiling. "Is someone down here?" No answer. I checked the bathroom, the storage room, even behind the old folding table stacked against the wall. Nothing. Finally, my eyes drifted to the far wall where the sealed door sat. The chain on the handle looked exactly the same as always. The padlock was closed. I told myself the sound had probably come from the pipes. Old buildings made weird noises, especially when the temperature swung this hard. I went back upstairs, forced myself to focus on closing paperwork, and tried not to think about it. The next night, I heard it again. This time, it was not just a cough. It was a cough followed by a faint scrape, like something heavy being dragged slowly across concrete. I went downstairs faster than I meant to, heartbeat loud in my ears. The basement lights flickered on, yellow and weak. The pantry door was ajar. I had not left it that way. Inside, several boxes of food had been pulled from the shelves and opened. Packages were torn, cans stacked in uneven piles. The same cold, damp air swirled around my ankles. But there was another scent beneath it now. Stale sweat and something sour like unwashed clothes. I backed out of the pantry and checked every corner of the basement again, my flashlight beam shaking just enough for me to notice. There was still no one there. The only thing out of place was the feeling that the air had been stirred recently, as if someone had just walked by. When I mentioned it to the pastor the next day, he exhaled slowly and rubbed his temples. "You are sure the outside doors were locked?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I always check them twice. If someone is getting in, they are not using those doors." He glanced toward the floor. I followed his gaze without meaning to, picturing the sealed door below us. "It is an old building," he finally said. "It settles. Animals get in sometimes. You are tired. Do not let your imagination run away with you." His voice was gentle, but there was a tremor under it. He did not offer to stay late with me. He did not call anyone to come inspect the basement. He just asked me to keep an eye on things and let him know if anything else went missing. The something else came sooner than either of us expected. It was about a week later when the bulk of the town gathered at the center for a community dinner. The place was warm and crowded, kids running between tables, older folks parked in their usual chairs along the walls. I was in and out of the kitchen, hauling trays and refilling coffee urns. That was when I noticed her. An older woman I had never seen before was sitting alone at the end of a table, her coat still on, head down. Her hair was a tangled gray curtain, partially hiding her face. When I brought a tray past her, she looked up. Her eyes were too bright. There was something hungry in them that had nothing to do with the food on her plate. "Thank you," she said softly as I passed. Her voice rasped, catching on the word. It sounded like a throat that had not spoken in a long time. Her plate was loaded with food I did not remember serving her. The portions were too big, piled too high. For a second, I wondered which family had taken pity on her and made sure she ate. Then the back of my neck prickled. I had seen that face before, or at least a version of it. In a framed photograph upstairs in the hallway, faded and smiling, standing next to a younger pastor in front of a half-built center. One of the founding donors, according to the plaque underneath. Except the woman in the photograph was supposed to be dead. The date on the frame said she had passed away almost 15 years earlier. I blinked and someone bumped into me, jostling the tray out of my hands. When I turned back, the woman was gone. The end of the table was empty, her chair pushed in. Her plate was nowhere to be seen. I did not sleep that night. The town moved around me like a single organism, and I slowly realized I was the only one who did not understand how its organs worked. People spoke in half phrases and shared glances. Conversation stopped when I entered rooms. The center, which had felt like neutral ground when I arrived, began to feel like a stage where I was the only one who had not been given the script. The breaking point came during the first real blizzard of the season. The wind screamed against the siding, and snowflakes hurled themselves at the tiny windows in a horizontal blur. The roads shut down, and the few people who had tried to leave town turned back. The center became a shelter that night, mattresses dragged into the classrooms, kids bundled in sleeping bags on the floor. By midnight, everyone was asleep, everyone but me. I was doing one last round when I passed the door to the basement and heard it. Voices. Not loud, not arguing. A low murmur like someone reciting something right up against the concrete ceiling. I stood there, torn between my job and the part of me that wanted to pretend I had never heard a thing. Then I gripped my flashlight, muttered that I was being stupid, and went downstairs. The voices stopped as soon as my foot hit the bottom step. The air felt thicker, like the humidity before a storm. The pantry door was closed, but the smell was stronger now. Sweat, old clothes, and something earthy, like soil that had been disturbed. That was when I saw the chain. It hung from the handle of the sealed door, ends dangling loose. The padlock lay on the floor a foot away, snapped cleanly open. The door itself was slightly ajar. There are moments when your body moves before your brain decides. My hand shot out and grabbed the door, pulling it shut with a metallic thud. I wrapped the chain around the handle, fingers clumsy, heart hammering. There was no way I could get the broken padlock back on. So I just twisted the chain as tightly as I could and stepped back. On the other side of the door, something shifted. Not loudly, just enough for the fine hairs on my arms to lift. "Who's in there?" I whispered. My mouth was so dry the words scraped coming out. Silence. Then, very softly, a voice I could not quite place, whispering my name. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet, and ran up the stairs. The next thing I remember clearly is standing outside in the screaming wind. My phone pressed to my ear, begging the dispatcher in the nearest actual city to send someone, anyone. By the time the police truck fought its way through the storm the next morning, the chain was back in place. A new padlock dangled from it, shiny and unbroken. The pastor stood beside it, arms folded, his face set in a stubborn line. "There's no one in there," he told the officers. "It is unsafe. It is flooded. You will damage the foundation if you start breaking doors for no reason." The officers looked from him to me and back again. One of them was from town. I recognized him from the diner. He shrugged, clearly caught between protocol and whatever quiet agreement the town had with itself. "Look," he said to me, his voice firm but sympathetic. "We checked the building. No signs of forced entry. No footprints outside. The snow would show if anyone had been coming and going. Maybe you were tired. Maybe you heard the storm. This is an old place." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to drag him down the stairs and force his face against the cold metal of that door and ask him if he could not feel the wrongness radiating from it. Instead, I nodded numbly and watched as they drove away. After that, nothing was the same. The pastor became colder with me, less patient. Some of the older townsfolk stopped greeting me at all. At the same time, the strange activity in the building slowed. No more missing food, no more coughing from below, no more voices. It was as if whoever or whatever had been living under our feet had gotten the message and gone quiet, or learned to be more careful. I finished my contract. I told them I would not be renewing. The pastor did not argue. When I left, he took the heavy ring of keys from my hand and removed one, just one, before dropping the rest into his pocket. I did not need to ask which key it was. Years later, I still dream about that basement. I dream about the chain, the open padlock, the door that never should have moved. I dream about the town gathered above, sleeping peacefully while something waited below them, fed and hidden and protected by people who claim to be afraid of evil. The worst part is not knowing how long it had been there, listening to every meeting, every confession, every whispered argument through the thin ceiling of the floor I walked on. The worst part is realizing that I was never in on the secret, because I was never supposed to stay long enough to become part of it. When I think about that town now, I do not picture the snow or the mountains or the dark streets. I picture that door, that chain, that voice saying my name like it already owned it. And I know deep down that whatever is buried in that permafrost basement is not the only thing the town is determined to keep out of sight. The first time I heard the voices over the VHF, the bay was completely still and the town's only streetlight had just gone out. I was standing on the deck of a small fishing boat tied up at the dock, nursing a thermos of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, watching the water turn the color of steel under the midnight sun that never quite set in summer. The radio crackled to life beside me, and a voice I did not recognize began speaking in calm, measured tones about weather conditions that did not match anything on the forecast I had checked an hour earlier. At the time, I assumed it was just another boat I had not met yet. The fleet was small out here, but people came and went with the seasons, and I was still new enough that I had not memorized every call sign and captain's voice. I was working a temporary position as a deckhand and communications assistant on a research vessel operating out of a settlement so small it did not have a proper name on most maps. The locals just called it the Bay, even though there were 100 bays along this stretch of coastline. It sat about 30 miles south of where Port Chatham used to be, back before everyone left in the 1950s and never came back. People did not talk about Port Chatham much, but when they did, it was always in the past tense, like speaking about a grave. The town I was working in had maybe 40 permanent residents, most of them related to each other in ways I never fully mapped out. There was no cell service, no internet that worked reliably, and the power ran off a combination of diesel generators and whatever solar panels people could afford to bolt onto their roofs. The only communication that mattered out here was the VHF marine radio. It was how boats coordinated, how weather warnings came through, how people gossiped and argued, and kept track of who was still alive. If your radio went silent for too long, someone would come looking. I grew to love the rhythm of it. The static hum underneath every transmission, the way voices crackled in and out depending on distance and atmospheric pressure, the informal shorthand everyone used. Channel 16 was the hailing frequency, but most of the real conversation happened on the working channels. Fishermen swapping notes about where the salmon were running, the harbor master calling out tide schedules, somebody's kid asking if anyone had seen their dog. It felt like listening to the pulse of the town. That first strange transmission did not set off any alarms in my head. The voice was male, older, with the clipped cadence of someone who had spent a lifetime on the water. He was talking to another vessel about an incoming squall, advising them to head east toward calmer seas. The details were specific. Wind speed, wave height, visibility dropping to less than a quarter mile. I checked my weather app out of habit, but the forecast still showed clear skies for the next 72 hours. I shrugged it off. Maybe he was farther out than I thought, picking up a system that had not reached us yet. I switched channels and went back to my work. It happened again 3 nights later. This time I was alone in the cabin of the research boat, logging data from the day's collections. The radio sat on the shelf above the navigation desk, volume low, but always on. Around 11 at night, a woman's voice came through, asking for a position check. She gave a set of coordinates and a vessel name I did not recognize. Another voice, this one younger and male, responded with his own position. They talked for maybe 2 minutes, discussing fuel levels and a broken bilge pump. and then the transmission ended. I wrote down the call signs on a scrap of paper, planning to ask the captain about them in the morning. When I did, he stared at the names for a long time, then handed the paper back to me without saying anything. "Do you know them?" I asked. "I knew them," he said quietly. "That boat went down in 1987. I thought he was messing with me. He had that kind of humor, dry and delivered with a straight face. But when I laughed, he did not laugh back. He just turned and walked out of the cabin, leaving me standing there with the paper still in my hand. I did not want to believe him. I told myself there were a dozen reasonable explanations. Old call signs getting reused, someone playing a prank with recordings, atmospheric conditions bouncing signals from hundreds of miles away. But when I asked around the docks later that day, the few people willing to talk about it gave me the same look the captain had. A look that said I had stumbled into something I was better off ignoring. One of the older fishermen, a man named Rowan who had lived in the bay his entire life, finally pulled me aside while I was coiling rope on the deck. "You're hearing the ghost traffic," he said, keeping his voice low even though no one else was nearby. "It happens out here. Always has. You do not respond to it. You do not acknowledge it. You just let it pass." "Ghost traffic," I repeated, trying not to sound skeptical. He nodded. "Voices from boats that are not here anymore. Sometimes it is weather reports from storms that happened decades ago. Sometimes it is mayday calls that nobody answered in time. The radio picks it up, plays it back. No one knows why. But you do not engage with it, Helena. You hear me? You do not talk back." I wanted to ask him more, but he was already walking away, his boots heavy on the wet planks of the dock. After that, I started paying closer attention. I kept a notebook next to the radio and wrote down every strange transmission I heard. Dates, times, call signs, fragments of conversation. Some of them were mundane. A man asking his deckhand to check the engine oil. A woman humming while she waited for a response that never came. Others were unsettling in ways I could not quite explain. Conversations that looped back on themselves, repeating the same phrases over and over. Voices that sounded too flat, too mechanical, like someone reading from a script they did not understand. And then there were the ones that mentioned the bay by name. The first time it happened, I was on shore, sitting in the cramped little building that served as the harbor office. The radio on the desk crackled, and a voice I had never heard before said, "This is the vessel Clearwater, 5 miles west of the bay. We have lost visual on the marker, boys. Requesting guidance." I grabbed the microphone without thinking, ready to respond. But Rowan was suddenly there, his hand clamping down on my wrist. "Do not," he said. The voice on the radio continued. "Repeat, this is Clearwater. Can anyone at the bay confirm buoy positions? We are taking on water. Need immediate assistance." My heart was pounding. Someone has to answer them. They are in trouble. Rowan's grip tightened. "There is no Clearwater out there. That boat sank in 1991. You answer that call, and you will be telling whatever is on the other end that you can hear it. And once it knows you can hear it, it will not stop." The transmission cut off mid-sentence, replaced by static. I sat there, shaking, staring at the radio like it had just tried to bite me. "What do you mean, it will not stop?" I whispered. Rowan let go of my wrist and rubbed his face with both hands. There was a woman a few years back, a teacher who moved here from Anchorage. She started hearing the voices too. She thought she was helping, started responding, giving directions, trying to coordinate rescues for boats that were not really there. After about a week, the voices started calling her by name. started describing things they should not have been able to see. What she was wearing, where she was standing, what she had eaten for breakfast. I felt my stomach turn over. What happened to her? She left, he said flatly. Packed up in the middle of the night, got on the next supply plane out. Last I heard, she would not go near a radio, would not even keep a phone in her house. I wanted to tell him that was insane, that there had to be a rational explanation. But the look on his face stopped me. He believed every word he was saying. The transmissions kept coming. At first they were sporadic, once or twice a week. Then they started happening every night. Always around the same time, always on the working channels where normal boat traffic should have been. I stopped writing them down after a while because the notebook was filling up too fast, and reading back over my notes made my skin crawl. Then they started getting personal. It was a Tuesday night, late enough that most of the fleet had already come in and tied up for the evening. I was on the research boat, alone, finishing up a maintenance checklist before heading to the bunkhouse on shore. The radio hissed, and a voice I had heard before, one of the recurring ones I had started to recognize, came through. "Helena," it said. Just my name, nothing else. I froze, wrench still in my hand. My pulse hammered in my ears. The voice continued. "Helena, can you confirm your position? We have you logged at the bay, but the signal is weak. Are you still aboard the research vessel?" I set the wrench down slowly, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I did not touch the microphone. I did not respond. "Helena, we need you to acknowledge this transmission. Safety protocols require confirmation. Please respond." The voice was calm, professional, exactly the tone you would expect from a Coast Guard operator or harbor master. But there was something wrong with the pacing. The pauses between words were too precise, too even, like someone reading from a script they had memorized. I switched the radio off. The voice kept going. "Helena, we are showing elevated wave activity in your area. You need to move to a secure location. Do you copy?" My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the radio as I yanked the power cable out of the back. The voice cut off mid-word, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breathing in the cabin. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the deck with a flashlight and a cup of coffee I never drank, watching the water and trying to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing. But when I went back into the cabin the next morning, the radio was still unplugged, the power cable lying on the floor where I had left it. I told Rowan what had happened. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tight. "You need to leave," he said when I finished. "I have 2 more weeks on my contract." "Helena." He said my name the way you would speak to a child about to touch a hot stove. "You need to leave. Today. Now. Whatever is out there, it is locked onto you. It knows your name. It knows where you are. The longer you stay, the worse it will get." "What do you mean, worse?" He looked past me, out at the water. There was a kid, maybe 10 years ago. Started hearing his own voice on the radio, giving him directions, telling him to take his father's boat out into the bay at night. He did it twice before his parents figured out what was happening and sent him to live with relatives in Juneau. He still will not go near the ocean. I felt cold all over despite the heavy jacket I was wearing. Are you saying something is trying to lure people out onto the water? I am saying that the voices do not just replay the past. They learn. They adapt. And once they have your attention, they will do whatever it takes to get you to respond. I tried to rationalize it. I tried to tell myself that there was some kind of signal interference, some phenomenon that nobody had documented yet. But the fear in Rowan's eyes was real, and I knew he was not the kind of man who scared easily. I made arrangements to leave on the next supply flight, which was not for another 3 days. During that time, I avoided the radio. I stayed off the boats as much as I could, sleeping in the bunkhouse on shore and keeping my distance from anything with a transmitter. But on the second night, I woke up to the sound of my own voice. It was coming from the portable VHF radio that one of the other deckhands kept on the shelf above his bunk. I had not even known it was there, much less that it was on. My voice, thin and crackling with static, was talking to someone I could not hear. "Yes, I copy. I am heading out now. Should I take the skiff or the motorboat?" I sat up so fast I nearly hit my head on the bunk above me. The other deckhand was snoring softly, completely unaware. I crossed the small room in 2 steps and grabbed the radio, switching it off and yanking the battery out. The voice kept talking. "Understood. I will meet you at the marker buoy. How long until you arrive?" I threw the radio across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor, pieces of plastic scattering. The voice finally stopped. I did not tell anyone. I did not wait for the supply flight. I packed my bag, paid a fisherman twice what the trip was worth to take me to the nearest town with an airstrip, and got on the first plane that would carry me south. I have not been back to the bay since. I still think about it sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep. I think about the voices and what they wanted, whether they were echoes of something that had already happened, or warnings of something that had not happened yet, whether they were trying to help or trying to harm. But mostly I think about the last thing I heard before I threw that radio against the wall. My own voice, calm and steady, saying, "I will meet you at the marker buoy." I have never owned a boat. I have never been to any marker buoy. But somewhere out there, on a frequency I will never tune into again, I know that my voice is still speaking, still giving directions, still leading someone towards something I will never understand. And I know, deep in a place I do not like to examine too closely, that if I ever went back, I would hear it again. Not on the radio this time, but somewhere much, much closer. I cannot look at satellite images anymore. Not after what I saw vanish between one winter and the next. Most people think maps are permanent, fixed things, that the land underneath them does not change unless you bulldoze it or burn it. But I know better now. I know that some places exist only when they want to, and that the snow in interior Alaska can cover more than just the ground. I grew up in a town so small it did not have a high school. If you wanted to graduate, you either did correspondence courses or moved in with relatives in Fairbanks. The population hovered around 200, give or take whoever had left for the season or come back after failing to make it anywhere else. Winters were brutal, the kind where the temperature did not rise above 0 for weeks and the darkness pressed down on you like a physical weight. We did not have roads in the traditional sense, just trails that snow machines packed down into something usable. There were maybe 15 other kids my age, and we ran in a pack the way kids do in places where there is nothing else to do. We knew every inch of that town, every shortcut, every hiding spot, every place the adults told us not to go. And there was one place in particular they warned us about more than any other. The snowfield. It sat about 3 miles east of town, a wide open stretch that we used as a shortcut when we were heading out to the lakes where people ice fished in the winter. From a distance, it looked like any other clearing, just a flat expanse of white surrounded by black spruce. But the adults in town had a strange way of talking about it, like they were choosing their words carefully. "The snow does not settle right there," my grandfather told me once. You cross it during the day if you have to, but you do not stop. And you sure as hell do not cross it at night. When I asked him why, he just shook his head and said it was a young person's job to listen, not to question. Of course, that made us want to cross it at night even more. It was Julian's idea. He was a year older than me, the kind of kid who took dares too seriously and had a scar on his chin from the last time he had ignored a warning. We were 16, bored out of our minds, and convinced we were smarter than every adult who had ever tried to scare us into behaving. A group of us decided to ride our snow machines out to the ice fishing cabins one evening in late February, right around the time when the days were starting to stretch a little longer, but the nights were still cold enough to freeze spit before it hit the ground. The plan was to meet at Julian's house, load up our machines, and head out around 6 in the evening. It was already dark by then, the kind of total darkness you only get in the Arctic winter when the sky is a black sheet and the stars look like holes punched in it. There were 5 of us. Me, Julian, his cousin Lydia, and 2 other kids whose names I have not spoken out loud in years. We rode in a line, headlights cutting through the darkness, the noise of the engines swallowing any chance of conversation. The cold bit through every layer of clothing, turning our breath into clouds that whipped away behind us. I remember feeling invincible, the way you do when you are young and stupid and have not yet learned that some warnings are not about control. They are about survival. The snowfield appeared ahead of us, a pale smudge against the darker line of trees. Julian slowed as we approached the edge, and the rest of us pulled up beside him. He killed his engine, and one by one, we did the same. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the world had stopped breathing. "Still want to do this?" Lydia asked. Her voice sounded small in the vastness around us. Julian grinned, his face half hidden by his balaclava. "It is just snow. Let us go." He fired up his machine and took off across the field without waiting for a response. The rest of us exchanged glances, and then we followed. Because that is what you do when you are 16 and your friends are already moving. The snow was smooth under our tracks, almost too smooth, like it had been groomed. Our headlights bounced across the surface, throwing long shadows that twisted and stretched in ways that made my eyes hurt. I was third in line, keeping my focus on the red taillight of the machine in front of me, trying not to think about how far we were from the tree line on either side. That was when Julian's engine cut out. His machine coasted to a stop in the middle of the field, and he turned to look back at us, confusion clear even from a distance. Lydia pulled up beside him, and I stopped a few feet away. The last 2 machines idled behind me, their engines a low rumble that I could feel in my chest. "What happened?" I shouted over the noise. Julian was already off his machine, checking the engine. "I do not know. It just died." One by one, the rest of our engines began to sputter. Mine coughed, jerked, and went silent. The others followed within seconds. The quiet that settled over us was suffocating. "This is not normal," Lydia said, and there was an edge in her voice I had never heard before. "We need to get out of here." Julian tried to restart his machine. The engine turned over once, twice, and then nothing. He tried again. Still nothing. That was when I noticed the GPS on my handlebars. The screen was spinning, the little arrow that marked my position whirling in circles like it could not figure out where I was. I pulled my compass out of my pocket, an old brass one my grandfather had given me, the kind that did not need batteries. The needle was doing the same thing, sweeping back and forth, refusing to settle. "Guys," I said, holding it up. "Look." We all checked our devices. Same thing. Every piece of navigation equipment we had was going haywire. And then I felt it. The snow under my boots was wrong. It gave too much. Like there was nothing, solid beneath it. I took a step, and my foot sank a few inches deeper than it should have. "Does the snow feel weird to you?" I asked. Julian crouched down and pressed his hand against the surface. His glove pushed through the top layer easily, and he pulled it back fast. "It is warm," he said. "Why is it warm?" That was when we heard the sound. It came from below us, a deep, resonant thud, like something enormous shifting its weight. The snow rippled, a visible wave that spread out from somewhere in the center of the field. We all felt it, the ground, or whatever was under the snow, moving. "We need to go," Lydia said, her voice rising. "We need to go right now." We tried to restart the machines. Julian's fired up first, coughing black smoke, but running. Lydia's started next. Mine turned over on the fourth try. The last two would not start at all. "Leave them," Julian shouted. "Double up. Let us go." The two kids whose machines would not start climbed on behind Lydia and me, and we took off toward the tree line, engines screaming. I did not look back. I did not want to see what was happening to the machines we had left behind. We made it to the edge of the field and did not stop until we were a quarter mile into the trees. When we finally slowed down, I turned around. The snowfield was still there, flat and white and empty. The two abandoned machines were gone. No shadows, no silhouettes, nothing. Just smooth, unbroken snow. Julian wanted to go back. Lydia and I physically stopped him, grabbing his arms and dragging him away when he tried to turn his machine around. We rode back to town in silence, and when we got there, we lied. We said the machines had broken down and we had to leave them, that we would go back in the morning with tools and sleds. But we did not. The adults organized a retrieval party the next day. I watched them leave from my bedroom window, and I watched them come back hours later, confused and empty-handed. They said there were no machines out there. No tracks, no debris, nothing. Just an empty field. My grandfather pulled me aside that night. "You crossed it, did not you?" he asked. I nodded. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them, they were sad. "You are lucky," he said quietly. "Whatever is under that snow, it let you go. Do not test it again." I left town 2 years later for college and never moved back. But a few years ago, when I was working remotely and feeling nostalgic, I pulled up satellite images of home on my computer. I wanted to see the old trails, the places we used to ride, maybe even the snowfield. I found the town easily. I found the tree lines, the lakes, the paths we used to take. But when I zoomed in on the area where the snowfield should have been, there was nothing but dense forest. Old-growth spruce, packed tight, the kind that takes a century to grow. I checked historical satellite images, going back year by year. Every single image, going back to the E-cell, earliest available footage from the 1980s, showed the same thing. Forest, no clearing, no snowfield. I called Julian. He still lived in Fairbanks, working construction. When I told him what I had found, he was quiet for a long time. "I still have the keys," he finally said. "The keys to the machine I left out there. They are in a drawer in my kitchen. I look at them sometimes and I think I am losing my mind." "You are not," I said. "Then what were we riding across, Helena? If that place does not exist, what the hell were we riding across?" I did not have an answer. I still do not. I keep those satellite images saved on my hard drive, and sometimes late at night I pull them up and stare at them, trying to reconcile what I saw with my own eyes against what the maps say is true. The forest is there, dense and unbroken in every single frame. But I know what I felt. I know what I heard, And I know that somewhere, in a drawer in a kitchen in Fairbanks, there is a set of keys to a machine that never came home. I do not go home for the holidays anymore. I make excuses, say I am too busy, that the flights are too expensive. But the real reason is that I cannot stand the idea of being anywhere near that forest, knowing that beneath those trees, or maybe instead of those trees, there is a field of snow that remembers me. And I am terrified of what might happen if I ever set foot on it again. I know everyone thinks small towns are safer. But what happened behind that clinic is the reason I sleep with a chair wedged under my apartment door. I moved to Anchorage 3 years ago, and I still check the locks twice before bed. Still jump when I hear footsteps in the hallway. Still feel like someone is watching me even when I know I am alone. The worst part is not knowing who it was. The worst part is that they are still out there, somewhere, living their normal life while I live with what they did. It started in the fall of 2019. I had just finished my nurse practitioner certification and was looking for work that would help me pay off student loans as quickly as possible. A rural health organization was offering signing bonuses for practitioners willing to work in remote Alaskan villages, places where medical staff was scarce and the need was desperate. The pay was good. The contract was only 18 months, and I told myself it would be an adventure. They assigned me to a village of about 300 people, accessible only by boat or bush plane depending on the season. The clinic was a small prefabricated building with an attached apartment for visiting medical staff. It had been recently renovated, new windows installed, fresh paint on the walls. But there was something about the layout that felt wrong from the first day. Too many windows facing the wrong directions. Too many angles where someone outside could see in, but you could not see out. The apartment was connected to the clinic through a narrow hallway with 2 doors, one on each end. The clinic door locked from the inside, but the exterior door to the apartment had a sticky deadbolt that never seemed to catch properly. I mentioned it to the maintenance coordinator during my first week, and he promised to fix it. He never did. The job itself was what I expected. Routine checkups, minor injuries, the occasional emergency that required me to call for a medevac. The villagers were polite but distant, the way people are with outsiders who are not planning to stay. I was fine with that. I was there to work, not to make friends. The darkness came earlier than I expected. By mid-October, the sun was setting before 4 in the afternoon, and by November, it barely rose at all. The long nights pressed against the windows, and the clinic felt like a fishbowl lit from the inside. Everyone outside able to see me while I stared at my own reflection. That was when I started noticing the motion light. There was a light mounted on the back of the building, aimed at a small gravel area where staff could park if they had a vehicle, which I did not. The light was supposed to turn on when it detected movement, stay on for a few minutes, then turn off. But during my evening shifts, I started noticing a pattern. The light would flick on, stay on for exactly 10 seconds, then go dark. A few minutes later, it would happen again. On, 10 seconds, off. At first, I assumed it was an animal. Foxes, ravens, maybe a loose dog. But the timing was too precise. It happened every evening around the same time, between 8 and 9 at night, and it always followed the same pattern. I mentioned it to Tobias, the village public safety officer. He was a quiet man in his 40s, well-liked, one of those people everyone seemed to trust without question. He came by the clinic one evening to check it out, standing in the back hallway with me, watching the light. It did not turn on while he was there. Probably just a loose wire, he said, shrugging. "I will have someone look at it." No one ever did. A week later, I found the first note. It was in my staff mailbox, a slot built into the wall near the clinic entrance where people could drop off paperwork or messages. The note was handwritten on a torn piece of lined paper, folded in half. "You should close your curtains before you shower." No signature, no indication of who had left it. My stomach dropped. The apartment had a small bathroom with a frosted window that faced the back of the building. I always assumed the frosting was enough, that no one could see through it. I closed the curtains that night, and every night after. 3 days later, another note. "You looked tired yesterday. You should get more sleep." This one was worse because it was specific. I had worked a double shift 2 days earlier, covering for another practitioner who had called in sick. I had been exhausted, and yes, I probably looked it. But how would someone know unless they had been close enough to see my face? I brought both notes to Tobias. He read them, frowned, and asked if I had noticed anyone hanging around the clinic. "No," I said, "but someone is watching me." "I will ask around," he said, folding the notes and putting them in his pocket. "In the meantime, keep your doors locked. Call me if anything else happens." I did keep my doors locked. I started checking them obsessively, testing the deadbolt on the apartment door, even though I knew it did not work properly. I closed all the curtains as soon as the sun went down. I stopped lingering in rooms with windows, but the notes kept coming. "I liked the soup you made last night. You sing when you think no one is listening. You should smile more. You have a nice smile." Each one was worse than the last, not because they were threatening, but because they were intimate. Whoever was writing them knew my routines, my habits, the small private things I did when I thought I was alone. And they were close enough to see inside, close enough to hear me. I stopped eating in the apartment. I started sleeping in the clinic exam room with the door locked, even though it was against protocol. I brought it up at a staff meeting, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual, if anyone else had received strange notes. The reaction was not what I expected. People shifted in their seats. A few exchanged glances. The administrative coordinator, a woman who had lived in the village her entire life, cleared her throat and said that maybe I was stressed, that rural life was not for everyone, that sometimes isolation could make people imagine things. "I am not imagining this," I said, pulling the notes out of my bag and spreading them on the table. "Someone is watching me. Someone has been watching me for weeks." Tobias picked up one of the notes, read it, and set it down without comment. The meeting moved on. That was when I realized that people knew, or at least suspected. And for whatever reason, they were choosing not to help. I started setting traps, small things. I left my apartment light on when I went to the clinic, then checked to see if anything had been moved. I sprinkled powder on the doorframe to see if anyone had opened it. I set up my phone to record video in the apartment while I was working. The powder was disturbed. Items in my closet were moved. But the video always cut out after an hour. The battery drained, even though it had been fully charged. Someone had access. Someone had a key. The breaking point came on a night in early December. I was finishing up paperwork in the clinic when I heard a sound from the back hallway. A soft scrape, like someone dragging their hand along the wall. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. I stood up slowly, grabbed a pair of bandage scissors from the desk, and walked toward the hallway. The clinic door was closed. The apartment door beyond it was closed. Everything looked normal. Except the frosted window in the bathroom was glowing, Someone had turned on the light inside. I had not been in the apartment for hours. I ran. I did not grab my coat, did not lock the door behind me, just ran out the front of the clinic and down the gravel road toward the nearest house. I pounded on the door until someone answered, a middle-aged man I recognized from the grocery co-op. "Someone is in my apartment," I said, breathless and shaking. "Please, you have to call Tobias." The man stared at me for a long moment, then stepped aside and let me in. Tobias arrived 20 minutes later. He searched the apartment and the clinic, checked the locks, looked under beds and inside closets. He found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been there. But when we went into the bathroom, the light was off. And on the mirror, written in the condensation, were 3 words. "I see you." Tobias wiped it away with his sleeve before I could take a picture. He told me it was probably a prank, that kids in the village sometimes did things like this. But his voice was tight, and he would not look at me. I left the next day. I called the health organization, told them I was terminating my contract for personal reasons, and took the first flight out. I did not pack everything. I left half my belongings in that apartment because I could not stand the idea of spending another night there. 2 months later, I got a call from the organization. They asked if I would be willing to speak to the police. Another practitioner, a man who had taken over my position, had reported a similar pattern of notes and surveillance. He had set up a hidden camera in his apartment and caught someone entering with a key. They would not tell me who it was. They said it was an ongoing investigation, that charges were being filed, that the matter was being handled internally to avoid damaging community relations. I never found out if anyone was arrested. I never found out who had been writing those notes, who had been standing outside my window, who had been in my apartment while I slept. The organization offered me a settlement in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement. I took it because I needed the money, and because I knew that fighting it would mean reliving everything again. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the fact that someone in that village still has a key, still knows my name, still remembers what I looked like when I thought I was alone. And I sleep with a chair wedged under my door, because deadbolts do not mean anything when someone else holds the key. My grandfather always said the snow could read you better than any friend, and that in our village, something else read the snow. When I was a kid, I thought he was just being poetic, trying to make the long winters sound more magical than miserable. Back then, the endless white felt like a blank page to me, not a record of everything that walked across it. I did not understand until much later that he meant it literally. I grew up in a tiny village on the edge of a frozen lake, a place so far off the road system that the only way in or out was by plane or snow machine, depending on the season. The lake was our highway in the winter. People cut trails across it, dragged firewood, hauled supplies, rode out to check trap lines. All of that meant tracks, thousands of them, crisscrossing the ice like veins. You learn to read them early out there? Which direction someone is going, how fast they were moving, whether they were carrying something heavy or just out for a ride. But there was one rule everyone repeated whenever the first real snow fell and stuck. Do not walk alone across the lake after dark. The elders said it like you might say, do not drink antifreeze, or do not sleep in a running car in a closed garage. Not as superstition, but as basic survival. If you had to cross at night, you took a machine and you never went alone. Ever. They never told us exactly why. Just stories that sounded more like warnings for children than anything else. tracks changing overnight, footprints that led out and never came back. My grandfather kept it simpler. Some things follow the tracks, he told me once when I was about 8. And some things make their own. I laughed and said that was what wolves did. He did not laugh back. The first man who vanished was a trapper named Tom. He was the kind of person everyone in town just assumed was immortal because he always came back, no matter how bad the storm or how thin the ice had been. He lived alone in a cabin a couple miles down the shore, and every winter he walked the same route out onto the lake to check his sets. Everyone recognized his boots, even from a distance. Old, patched in places with duct tape, the soles worn in a way you could spot instantly. One morning in January, he did not come back. At first, nobody panicked. It was not unusual for him to spend a night or two at one of his outlying cabins if the weather turned. But by the second day, people were worried. By the third, half the village was out on the ice, following his trail. I remember standing on the shore, holding my grandfather's hand, watching them go. The air was so clear that voices carried all the way back. I saw my uncle bending over, pointing at the snow, then straightening up fast like he had been shocked. Tom's tracks led out from the shore in a straight, steady line. Then, about 100 yards out, they just stopped. Not veered off, not faded gradually, stopped. One last pair of boot prints pressed into the snow, and then nothing beyond them. No sign of a fall, no disturbance, no broken ice. The surface around that final step was smooth and undisturbed, as if he had stepped onto a solid floor and then vanished. They drilled test holes in the ice around that spot, convinced there had to be something, a hidden spring, a weak patch, anything. The ice was over 2 feet thick, solid, safe. They marked the place with willow branches and brought everyone back in as the sun went down. I remember the way the adults' faces looked, tight and gray, like they were trying not to show us how scared they were. They never found his body. The next morning, new tracks appeared. They started at the spot where Tom's boot prints ended. No one saw them form. No one heard anything during the night. But when the first snow machines went down to check the markers, they found a fresh trail leading from that bare patch of snow back toward shore. The boots were the same size as Tom's, but the way they were set was wrong. Too far apart, like whoever was walking did not quite understand how long a human stride should be. Some steps sank deep, others barely pressed the surface, as if the weight behind them kept changing. The tracks went right up to the edge of the lake and then followed the shoreline toward town. By afternoon, the whole village knew. The trail wound between houses, pausing in places that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, even as a kid who did not fully get it. Under bedroom windows, beside back doors, behind the clinic. The prints would stop there for 2 or 3 steps, dug in like someone had stood and watched for a long time, then move on. The adults tried to act like it was just drifting snow playing tricks or kids messing around, but their behavior betrayed them. Elders went out with spruce branches, brushing over the tracks, breaking the pattern, muttering under their breath in languages my generation had not bothered to learn. That night, every curtain in the village was drawn tight before the sky even got fully dark. The next morning, there were more tracks. These were not boot prints. They were longer, narrower, almost like someone had walked heel to toe in some kind of flat-soled shoe, but deeper than any human weight should have sunk. They wove through town in loops and spirals, crossing themselves, creating patterns that made my eyes hurt if I stared too long. Wherever they passed, they blurred the tracks beneath, so you could not tell what had been there before. They did not start from the lake. They did not end anywhere. They just appeared, as if someone had lowered a huge stamp from the sky and pressed it into the snow in random places. When the sun went down that evening, my grandfather locked the door, something he usually did only as a formality. "Stay inside," he told me. "If you hear anything, you do not look out the window." "Is it an animal?" I asked. Part of me wanted it to be an animal I could understand. Animals had rules. He looked at me for a long time, and for the first time in my life, I thought he might actually lie. "It is something that reads tracks," he said instead. "And now it knows ours." That night, I lay awake listening to the house creak and settle. Sometime after midnight, I heard crunching outside, the soft, unmistakable sound of feet moving slowly over snow. Not the staccato of a running dog, not the heavy drag of a snow machine being pushed. Slow, deliberate steps. They stopped beneath my bedroom window. I did not move. I did not breathe. I waited for a knock that never came, for a voice that never spoke. The air in my room felt thick, like I was underwater. I knew with absolute bone-deep certainty that if I pulled back the curtain and looked out, something would be looking back at me. Eventually, the footsteps moved on, that same careful, measured crunch fading into the distance. In the morning, there were prints under my window, not boots. Those long, narrow marks, pressed deep, the snow around them slightly melted, as if something warm had stood there for a long time. They did not lead to the house or away from it. They just appeared below my window and ended a few feet later, like whatever had been there did not need to come or go the way we did. After that, no one crossed the lake alone, not even in daylight. Snow machines went in pairs, always with radios, always with eyes on the shore. Kids were forbidden from going down to the ice at all without an adult. It stopped being a warning and became a law everyone obeyed without question. The tracks continued for a while. Some mornings, there would be new ones circling the village's outermost houses, looping between sheds and fish racks, tracing paths no one admitted to walking. On days after blizzards, when you would expect a clean slate, sometimes a single line of prints would be there as soon as the wind died, too crisp to have survived hours of drifting. Then, one winter, they just stopped. No one celebrated. No one said maybe it was over now. We just quietly kept obeying the old rule. Do not walk alone on the lake at night. Do not give it an easy path to follow. I moved away when I was 19, as soon as I could arrange it. I told people it was for school, for work, for opportunities you could not find in a place with more dogs than people. All of that was true. But I also left because every time I stepped onto snow, I felt watched. Like every footprint I made was a line in a story something else was reading. In the city, snow does not last. It turns to gray slush at the edges of parking lots, disappears down storm drains. People do not pay attention to tracks here. But I do. I notice when my own footprints look wrong, when they seem deeper than they should or slightly out of line. I notice when the snow outside my building holds a shape that does not match any shoe I have ever seen. I still go back to visit my grandfather sometimes. The village has not grown. If anything, it is smaller. People ask me about the city, about traffic and grocery stores and jobs that do not involve fish or freight. I sleep on his couch, close to the wood stove, listening to the old familiar creaks. The lake looks the same from his window, a broad white sheet stretching to the horizon. Last winter, I went down to the shore alone for the first time in years. I did not step onto the ice. I just stood on the packed snow at the edge, looking out. The wind had smoothed most of the old machine trails, leaving only faint lines. For a second, I could almost pretend I had imagined everything, that memory had exaggerated it the way it does with childhood fears. Then a gust of wind swept fine snow across the lake, and for a moment I saw them. Not clear, not crisp like before, but there. A line of long, narrow impressions cutting across the wide blankness, looping once in a slow curve, then fading. I blinked and they were gone. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe it was my mind filling in patterns it expected to see. Or maybe something out there had turned a page, checking to see if we were still following the rules. When people ask me why I hate fresh, unbroken snow, why I walk in other people's footprints instead of making my own, I do not tell them any of this. It is too long a story and too unbelievable. I just say it is a habit from home. The truth is simpler and harder. I know the snow remembers, and I am not interested in reminding anything out there how to find me. I still tell myself I was just lost that night. But the road I took does not exist on any map I have checked since. I drive for work in Alaska, hauling parts and supplies between little coastal communities that only barely cling to the term town. You get used to whiteouts, surprise ice, and GPS glitches. You do not get used to a whole building disappearing. This was late October, that shoulder season where the weather cannot decide between rain and snow. I was coming back from a delivery run to a small port town and trying to beat a storm the forecast said would hit around midnight. The sensible plan was to stay in town and leave in the morning. Instead, I looked at the sky, decided I could outrun it, and pointed the truck toward home. About an hour into the drive, the storm arrived early. Hard sideways snow, wind pushing the truck just enough to make my hands tighten on the wheel. My wipers could not keep up, and the reflective markers along the road disappeared into a gray-white blur. I watched my fuel gauge tick down and started doing that quiet mental math you do when you realize you may have screwed up. I was still 40 miles from the next town when the GPS glitched. The main highway line vanished from the little screen, then came back, then flickered. For a few seconds, the device showed nothing but my blue arrow floating on an empty grid. Then a side road appeared, branching off to the right in a neat curve. A smaller line, labeled with a name I did not recognize, and a tiny fuel pump icon. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield. Through the blowing snow, I could just make out what looked like a plowed turnoff, a dark gap in the endless white. The main road ahead was vanishing into a wall of storm. The little fuel icon on the screen seemed to pulse at me like a heartbeat. I told myself it was one of those private roads some of the bigger lodges kept, maybe with a generator and a tank where I could top off. I told myself that driving on fumes in a blizzard was stupider than trusting an outdated GPS. I turned. The feel of the tires changed as soon as I left the main highway. It was still snow-covered, but underneath I could feel gravel, not asphalt. The trees closed in quickly, black shapes leaning in on both sides, branches heavy with snow. My headlights carved out a narrow tunnel. There were no other tire tracks on the road. No poles, no reflectors, just that thin, pale strip cutting through the dark. I checked the GPS again. The little arrow moved neatly along the line, the fuel icon now less than a mile ahead. I should have turned back right then. Instead, I kept going, telling myself that if it looked even a little wrong, I would just turn around. The first sign was hand-painted. Fuel, coffee, hot food, it said. White letters on a red board nailed crookedly to a birch tree. An arrow pointed ahead. My shoulders loosened a little. This was exactly the kind of odd little roadside place you found out. Here. Family run, cash only, generator humming in the back. The road widened into a clearing, and I saw it. A small, square house with a steep metal roof, half buried in snowdrifts. Light glowed from the windows, warm and yellow. A tall metal tank stood off to one side, hose coiled neatly on its rack. A single porch light burned over the front steps, throwing a pool of light onto the snow. I did not see any other vehicles. I parked near the tank, killed the engine, and sat there for a second, listening to the sudden silence. Through the windshield, I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. Someone was home. When I stepped out, the cold hit me like a wall. The air smelled like wood smoke and diesel. Underneath that, something faintly sweet, like baked bread. I climbed the 3 wooden steps and knocked. It took a moment. Then the door opened. A woman in her 50s stood there, hair pulled back in a gray braid, apron dusted with flour. She smiled like she had been expecting me. "You made it just in time," she said. "Storm's going to shut this road down any minute." Her confidence that there even was a road to shut down should have bothered me more than it did. Inside, the house was almost painfully cozy. A wood stove radiated heat from the corner, a kettle hissing gently on top. A single bare bulb hung over a small table. There were 2 mugs on it already, steam curling from both, as if she had poured one for herself and one for someone else who had not arrived yet. A man sat in a chair by the window, hands folded in his lap. He looked to be around the same age as the woman, hair thinning, face deeply lined. He did not stand up when I came in, just watched me with an expression I could not read. "You are soaked," the woman said. "Sit down. I will get you coffee. You can tell us where you are headed." I hesitated, but the warmth and the smell of something baking were too much. I sat. The chair creaked under my weight. The man's eyes followed me the whole way. "Roads bad out there?" he asked. "Zero visibility," I said. I was starting to worry about gas. "Good thing you saw the sign," the woman said, setting a mug in front of me. "We do not get many this late in the season." Her hands were steady. Mine were not. We talked for a few minutes. They introduced themselves as William and Isolde. No last names, no explanation of how long they had been there. When I asked, they said a while and changed the subject. They knew about the port town I had just left. They knew about the storm warnings. They knew the name of the company logo on my jacket without me pointing it out. At some point, I realized I had not heard a generator. The lights hummed with that faint electrical buzz you get from grid power, but there were no lines on the poles outside. I told myself the generator was out back, muffled by snow. "You can fuel up before you leave," William said. "Cash is fine. You should not be on this road much longer. They like to close it." "Who is they?" I asked. He smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. "People who do not like strangers getting lost." Something about the way he said "lost" made the hairs on my arms stand up. The woman brought out a plate of cookies, still warm, dusted with powdered sugar. They smelled incredible. She insisted I take some for the road, wrapping them in wax paper and pressing the bundle into my hand. "Long drive ahead," she said. "Sugar helps." I noticed her fingers as she did it. Clean, nails trimmed, but with faint dark smudges that looked like old ink or soot ground into the creases. The same smudges were on the man's hands, on the door frame, on the edge of the table. The kettle whistled. For a second, over the sound, I thought I heard something else, like a muffled voice coming from somewhere below us. The floor under my chair felt slightly hollow, like there was space beneath it. "How far is it back to the main highway?" I asked. "Not far," William said. "You will be back on familiar ground before you know it." He said it too quickly. The woman's eyes flicked to his face and away. I stood up. I should get going while the gap in the storm holds. "How much for the fuel?" "40, he said, without even asking how much I planned to take. I paid him. The cash disappeared into his apron pocket without a receipt. When I stepped outside, the wind had died down. Snow still fell, but more gently, swirling in the light from the porch. The tank worked. Fuel gurgled into my truck's tank, cold and real, and exactly what I needed. The house glowed behind me, windows opaque. I realized I had not seen a single photograph on the walls inside. No family pictures, no calendars, nothing to mark time. When I slid back into the driver's seat and looked at the GPS, the little road line that had led me here was gone. The screen showed my arrow sitting in empty gray space, no junctions, no icons, nothing. I did not go back to the door. I did not knock to ask. I turned the truck around and drove back the way I had come, following my own fresh tire tracks until the main highway appeared out of the dark like I had never left it. The storm hammered the truck the whole way home, but I made it. I ate one of the cookies at a gas station just outside town. It tasted fine, maybe a little too sweet. I threw the rest away. There was a faint powder on the wax paper that did not look like sugar when I looked at it under the harsh fluorescent lights. A few days later, I tried to find the road again on a map. Nothing. I updated my GPS software. Still nothing. I asked a couple of drivers who had been running that route for years if they had ever seen a fuel stop tucked back in the trees in that stretch. They all gave me the same answer. There is nothing out there but forest and swamp. Sometimes I wonder if they were lying, the way people in small towns lie to outsiders to keep their own secrets. Other times, I think about the hollow feel of that floor, the ink on their hands, the way the GPS line appeared just when I needed it and vanished as soon as I left. I still drive that highway. When the snow comes down hard and visibility drops, I keep my eyes straight ahead. If a side road appears in my headlights, cutting through the trees with a hand-painted sign promising fuel and coffee, I will not turn this time. Some places help you when you are desperate. Some places are just very patient traps. You would think being the only tourist in an Alaskan town for 3 weeks would make you unforgettable, but I almost disappeared there without anyone really noticing. I went up after a breakup, convinced that a small coastal town in the off-season would be the perfect place to reset. No crowds, cheap room, endless gray ocean to stare at until my brain quieted down. It sounded peaceful when I booked the trip. It did not feel peaceful by the time I left. The town was small enough that you could walk from one end to the other in 20 minutes. In the summer, cruise ships anchored offshore and tenders ferried people in to buy souvenirs and salmon plates and handmade crafts. By late September, all of that was over. When I arrived, the last gift shop was boarding up its windows. The only place still renting rooms was a 3-story lodge perched above the harbor, half hotel and half bar. The owner, a woman in her 60s named Marjorie, greeted me like I was a problem she had already decided to tolerate. She checked me in, handed me a brass key with a heavy tag that said 204, and told me that breakfast was at 7, the bar closed when she felt like it, and there would be no housekeeping unless I asked. "There will not be anyone else on this floor," she added, "so try not to burn the place down." I laughed. She did not. At first, being the only tourist was exactly what I wanted. I could take long walks along the shoreline without dodging people taking photos. I spent hours in the empty diner, nursing coffee refills while the waitress told me stories about winter storms that had ripped boats from their moorings like toys. People learned my name quickly. They knew where I was staying, what I ordered, how I took my coffee. It felt small and contained and safe. Then I started noticing how much they knew. One evening, on my 5th or 6th day, I went down to the bar in the lodge. There were maybe 8 people there, all locals, half of them in orange bib overalls that still smelled faintly of fish. The television over the bar played a muted hockey game. I ordered a drink, and before I could sit down, one of the men at the bar raised his glass toward me. "How was the overlook?" he asked. "Fog lifted up there, or are you still staring at clouds?" I froze. I had gone to the overlook that afternoon, a little cliff path about a mile outside town. I had not told anyone I was going. I had not posted about it, had not even taken a photo. I felt my face twist into a polite smile. "Foggy," I said. "How did you know I went?" He shrugged. "You are the only one dumb enough to walk that way in this weather. We see when you leave." Everyone laughed like it was a harmless joke. Maybe it was. At the time, it just felt like small-town awareness. People notice things when there is nothing else to do. The first real crack in that illusion came a couple of nights later. I had been at the bar again, staying later than I meant to, letting myself get pulled into a dice game at one of the corner tables. When I finally went upstairs, the hallway was dark and quiet. My room was at the far end, overlooking the harbor. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and knew immediately that something was wrong. Nothing was obviously out of place. My bag sat where I had left it. My jacket hung on the back of the chair, the bed covers slightly rumpled from where I had tossed my book that morning. But the air felt different, like someone had just been there. There was a faint smell of soap that was not mine. I checked the door again. The deadbolt was still set. The chain was still latched the way I had left it when I went downstairs. The window was locked. I told myself I was being paranoid. I went to brush my teeth, reached into my toiletry bag, and noticed my toothbrush was wet. I had not used it since that morning. I stood there in the tiny bathroom, toothbrush in my hand, heart pounding. I checked my bag more closely. My clothes were folded differently than I remembered. The zipper on the side pocket was left halfway open. My phone charger, which I always left coiled in the same spot, was lying stretched out across the floor. The next day, I convinced myself it had been housekeeping, even though Marjorie had said they did not come unless requested. I went down to the front desk and asked anyway. "No one has been in your room," she said, eyes not quite meeting mine. "We do not clean unless someone leaves." I laughed it off, said it must have been my imagination. But I watched her closely as I spoke. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. After that, I started paying attention to the little things. The glass on the nightstand would be a few inches to the left in the evening. My boots, which I kicked off haphazardly near the door, would be neatly lined up when I woke up. I left my book open face down on the bed and came back to find it closed, with the bookmark moved forward a chapter I had not read. There were notes too, but not the written kind. Comments. In the diner one afternoon, the waitress smiled and asked, "Sleep any better last night? You did not toss and turn so much." She said it like a throwaway line, already turning to refill someone else's coffee, but my hand tightened on the mug hard enough that it sloshed. "How would you know that?" I asked. She looked puzzled. "Thin walls in that old place. We hear everything," she said. "Do not worry, nobody cares." Except they did. You could feel it in the way conversation stopped when I walked past. in the way people watched me cross the street, their eyes tracking me a little too long. In a bigger place, you can disappear into the crowd. Here, I was the only variable, the only new thing. I told myself they were just curious, maybe lonely, maybe bored. It worked until the night I found the room. It was raining hard, the kind of cold coastal rain that soaks you through no matter how good your jacket is. The power had flickered twice. I had gone downstairs to ask if I should expect an outage, and Marjorie had told me they had a backup generator and not to worry. On my way back up, I did something I had not done yet. I tried my key in another door. The lodge had 3 floors. I was on the second, with a hallway of identical doors. I had never seen anyone else go into or out of any of them. On an impulse I still cannot fully explain, I stopped at the door across from mine and slid my key into the lock. It turned. The door opened easily. The room inside was dim, the curtains drawn. It was not empty. A single suitcase sat on the luggage rack, half-packed, clothes folded in careful stacks. On the small table beside the bed was a notebook, its pages covered in neat handwriting. I took one step into the room and read the name on the first page, written in big letters, Nathan, my name. Under it, in neat columns, were notes. My arrival date, the time I usually came down for breakfast, the length of my morning walks. Phrases like prefers to sit by window and does not lock balcony door until late. There were little underlined sections. Ideal time, shower 9:15 p.m., bar crowded, hallway empty. My vision tunneled. I flipped through more pages. Each one was more detailed than the last. There were sketches of the lodge floor plan, timetables, a list titled Weaknesses that made my skin crawl. Drinks quickly, trusts staff, always alone. I felt the air shift behind me and spun around. Marjorie was standing in the doorway, holding a laundry basket. "You should not be in here," she said. Her voice was calm, but something cold and sharp moved underneath it. "What is this?" I demanded, holding up the notebook. "Why does this have my name on it?" She stared at the notebook for a long moment, then shrugged one shoulder. "People write things," she said. "Plans, stories. You were not supposed to see that." "Whose room is this?" I asked. She did not answer. Instead, she stepped aside and gestured toward the hallway. "You need to go back to your room, Nathan," she said. "Now." I left. I took the notebook with me. I do not know why I did not go straight out the front door and keep running. Shock, maybe. Or the knowledge that the last ferry had left hours ago. And there was no bus, no train, nothing to carry me away in the middle of that storm. In my room, I locked the door, wedged the chair under the handle, and read. The earlier pages were not about me. They were about someone else. Another man, a tourist who had stayed in the lodge the previous winter. Same structure, same kind of notes, routines, habits, weaknesses. The final entry about him was short. Too cautious. Never alone outside. Try again next season. There were blank pages between his section and mine, as if whoever wrote it had been waiting. I did not sleep. I sat in the chair with my back to the wall, listening. Once, around 2 a.m, I heard footsteps stop outside my door. The handle turned against the resistance of the wedged chair. There was a pause, then the soft scrape of fingers against wood. I held my breath until the footsteps moved on. At first light, I packed what I could and left the rest. I did not check out. I did not say goodbye. I walked down to the harbor and offered a fishing boat crew half my remaining cash to take me to the next town down the coast. They did not ask for a reason. Months later, back home, I saw a news article shared online. A hiker had gone missing near that same town, last seen staying at the only open lodge. The quote from the owner said he had been a quiet man, kept to himself, went out for walks a lot. The phrasing was familiar, almost exactly what had been written in that notebook beside my name. I think about that sometimes when people romanticize small towns, talk about how nice it must be that everyone knows you. They say it like it is a comfort, but there is a thin line between being known and being studied. And the scariest thing about that lodge was not the eyes on me or the meticulous notes about my habits. It was realizing that they were patient, that I had not escaped because I was clever or careful, but because, for reasons I will never know, whoever was filling that notebook had decided I was not worth the effort. And somewhere, in a drawer in that lodge, or under a mattress, or hidden behind a panel in the wall, there is still a notebook with my name on it, waiting for the right season.